By midnight, the interstate had emptied into a long ribbon of cold, and the glow of my dash felt like a small campfire in a country nobody wanted anymore. And that is when dispatch pinged a late ad with an address on the far edge of town that my GPS chewed twice before pretending to know. After hours drop, leave on dock 3, paperwork in office, lumper fee pre-approved, call if questions, the message said, and the phone number under it rang to a mailbox that had not heard a human voice since the last recession. I rolled off at a cracked exit that took me through an industrial park full of dead signs and weeds tall enough to draft in the wind. My headlights washed over a wall of corrugated steel with a faded logo I could not read, dock doors like eyelids pulled halfway down, a chain-link gate standing open to nothing. The place looked empty the way a mouth looks empty when the breath has been held too long. I idled past a burned-out yard goat and a stack of blue pallets slick with frost and lined up for dock 3 because the only working light on the whole block stood over it like a last idea. The green dock light blinked once as if noticing me, then steadied. The placard over the door said, Door 03 in paint that had managed to survive wind, and the yellow paint on the bumpers looked fresh where everything else looked tired. I set up the back end with my mirrors and the slow language of the wheel that comes from too many nights like this, pulled the trailer square to the rubber seal, touched the ICC bumper and let the truck give that soft sigh that means it finally got to stop. I set the brake, killed the marker lights, chalked the wheels on principle, and reached for the dock lock rope out of habit, then froze because the lock had already grabbed, a steel hook biting my ICC bar with a clunk I felt through the frame. The red light flipped on without my hand on the switch. The rubber seal around the door pressed in on my trailer skin, and for a second the pressure on the box sounded like a long, slow exhale. I told myself it was wind caught in a shape it liked. The air smelled like wet cardboard and copper. I climbed out, walked back with a flashlight, and saw the dock leveler on its own hinge rise a hair like a cat on a windowsill. No one stood at the control panel. The office window set above the dock lane held a corkboard with plastic sleeves and a swinging chain for a pen, and a sign that asked drivers to sign in and print neatly. The sheet on the clipboard already had my name at the bottom in my own ugly block letters with the timestamp I could see on my watch. I touched the paper and the ink smudged like it had been written seconds ago. The camera dome above the office sent back my reflection in a rolling gray that made faces look soft. I pushed the buzzer for the office door because rules make people feel sane. The buzzer answered with a tone that made my teeth hurt and the maglock clicked like a patient letting go of a secret. Inside the office, everything was older than it should have been. A beige CRT monitor asleep over a steel desk. A wall calendar pinned to 3 years ago on the month with a warehouse cat in a Santa hat. A pot of pens that had lost their caps and dyed the bottom black. The computer woke when I touched the keyboard. The login screen did not ask for a password. It rolled directly to a shipping screen with my bill number already up. It showed my company, my trailer number, my commodity, and a note that read, Unload to floor staging bay C. Do not stack higher than shoulder. And the word shoulder made me swallow because somewhere a person had typed that on a night when that rule made sense, and tonight there was no person. I cracked the trailer doors because pretending you did not hear a building breathe is easier if you keep working, and cold air flooded the hole between the rubber seals and my box. The dock plate rose smooth with a hydraulic sound and settled on my floor without anyone touching the controls. I stepped into the box with my flashlight and listened. The sound of empty cardboard on wood moves is different from the sound of anything else. It has a dry applause to it. I heard it now. A soft shifting 2 bays down where the light did not reach, as if pallets were finding the right to lean. I wrapped the handle of my pallet jack against the deck like a man telling a dog not to come closer. It echoed down the row of doors in a way that made the building sound deeper than it was. I moved the first pallet to the threshold, and the plate dipped to accept it like a tongue tasting a spoon. I pushed it onto the dock and staged it under the number C stenciled at my feet, and when I turned back for the second pallet, the first had slotted itself a foot to the left, with its twin tight beside it like soldiers who had understood a new order. I told myself the floor was not level and that gravity and stiction had conspired to make the world feel haunted. As I dragged the second pallet toward daylight, the dock light flicked from red to green and back to red like an eye squeezing shut, and the lock clacked twice in small adjustments like a person setting their jaw. Somewhere farther inside, a forklift backup alarm beeped 3 times from a place the echo could not fake, and then stopped like the driver had set the brake, and the hair along the back of my neck learned how to hold its breath. I went back into the office to leave the signed bills where a lumper could find them because paperwork deserves faith, even when nothing else does. The sign-in sheet had another line below mine now with a name I recognized from a memorial patch on a hat I see at truck stops alongside mine. A man who had died during the last winter in a jackknife. Everyone swore could not have been his fault. The time beside his name was last year's date and the same hour. The office printer clicked on with its own mind and printed a receipt for a lumper fee charged to a card number that ended in the 4 digits on my fuel card. I had not swiped. The receipt dropped warm into my hand as if this place had hands and did not mind spending my money. The intercom on the wall hissed and a voice I wanted to call a voice but could have been moving air said, "Base C ready," and when you hear a building talk to you in your own language, you realize how many words you use in a day that are built to fit around machines. By the 3rd pallet, I started to watch the walls more than the floor. The steel ribs of the place showed through where drywall had given up, and behind them, a dim throb of light moved, not like a short, more like the slow pulse of a siren. In the convex safety mirror hung at the end of the aisle, my reflection lagged half a beat and lifted the pallet jack handle a fraction after I did, and that small delay made me not want to look up again. I staged 4 pallets and went back into the box for a 5th, and the first 4 had arranged themselves into a double stack that did not look possible without a fork. The air had lost the copper smell and now carried a damp cement smell that tile stores call clean and basements call home. I pushed the jack back in and bumped the stop strip and felt the trailer shift like something had leaned against the far wall from the outside and then leaned back. When I pulled my head around the corner of the dock seal to check, the yard beyond the bumper was empty and my mirror on the truck showed only my own door and a smear of frost catching orange from the dock light. The glow behind the office glass looked warmer than it had a minute ago. I did the math on how fast I could get the rest off the deck and whether pre-staging would make sense. The building put a cold breath in my face through some vent I could not see and made the decision for me. There are noises you learn to trust on docks. The clack of a fork carriage picking up slack, the little squeal of steel wheels on broken paint, the slap of shrink-wrap tails. I heard all of them at once from different corners, a chorus performed by machines I could not see. I moved faster and kept count because counting is a spell. By 8 pallets, my breath steamed so hard it felt like the building had decided to give me back my weather. By 10, my phone buzzed and the screen showed a text from my dispatcher telling me the customer had just authorized an unload and could I verify dock door 3. And while I was reading the note, my ELD clock rolled a minute backward and the HOS screen blinked to "on duty unassigned" for a second like a ghost had put a thumb on it. I called dispatch and heard my own voice on my voicemail before the first ring finished. The same words I had used last week to check in from a different town, and I hung up because the sound of your own courage from last Tuesday does not belong in a room where the door closes on the truck like a mouth. The office had a hallway behind it, with a window into a break room with a long table and 4 chairs, and a bulletin board with a laminated sheet about lockout-tagout, and a Polaroid of 3 men in high-vis vests with their arms around each other. The edges of the photo had curled, and the names handwritten in the white border had bled into the paper. Someone had tacked a strip of masking tape under it and written, "Bring it home," under a drawing of a tractor that a child had made with severe confidence. A corridor past the break room led to the battery chargers, 3 red boxes lined up like altarpieces, and their charge meters glowed faintly, rising and falling together in a rhythm that made the skin of my arms feel like it should be participating. I stuck a hand near the nearest charger and felt a gentle pulse of warm air and the tiny prick of static that makes hair interested. The backup alarm sounded again very close, and I whipped around ready to jump clear and saw only an empty lane and 4 wheel tracks in dust crossing my fresh ones, and a smear of heel rubber where a driver would have stepped down and dragged a boot. I said hello because saying hello is the spell human beings use when they hope to turn strange into neighbor. The sound in the room went lower and more regular, like a person settling. When I tried the office phone, it gave a dial tone that tasted like pennies, and the line never took numbers unless I dialed 0, and that landed me on a recording that said, "You have reached the front desk and please sign in," and it was my voice saying it in a tone I use with strangers who are doing their best. The monitor over the desk that had shown nothing but gray when I walked in now played back video that lagged real time by 10 seconds, me walking past the office door from 10 seconds ago with a flashlight and a bad posture, and it hurt my head to see my own back turned and know the building had its own opinion of my timeline. On the end table, a 3-ring binder sat open to a delivery log, and all the entries for the last month belonged to carriers I knew, some in my company, some not, and the destination column next to each was blank. In the remarks column, someone had written corrective action, and then drawn a small, neat box. The last line carried tonight's date and my trailer, and in the box someone had written, "Breathe." I went back to the dock because when you cannot articulate fear, you can sometimes outwork it. The red light still burned on the wall, and the dock lock held with a loyalty I had not asked for. The rubber seal pressed in on the sides of my trailer, and every few seconds a tremor ran through it, like a throat trying not to cough. I decided to drop the plate and pull off the hook and say the load would have to figure itself out. The control box mounted to the wall had one big yellow button for raise and a small black toggle for lock release, and someone had written in Sharpie under the toggle, "Do not break the seal," and the shape of the handwriting matched the handwriting in the office log where my name had already been written. I flipped the toggle anyway, and the lock stayed firm, then clicked tighter like a jaw. The bug zapper over the door stuttered and lit a dark fly into a quiet star. The intercom hissed and the same, not quite a voice said 20 left, and I realized I had not counted that high yet because I had been pretending this would end before I had to decide where it ends. I stepped into the box for another pallet, and the floor felt warmer because heat had climbed the ribs from below. Somewhere beneath the dock a boiler must have switched on, which made no sense in a building with no man to touch the switch. The jack slid easier over that warmth, and the pallet felt lighter in my hands, as if the wood had dried in the last 5 minutes. When I staged it, the tags facing me shifted to show the SKU, as if the load wanted to be easier to read. My mouth was dry, and my tongue felt thick, and the air smelled like the wet concrete smell had given birth to another smell I did not want to identify. The convex mirror at the end of the aisle showed me again a half-beat late, and then showed a man in a vest step across the open where no man stood, and the picture rolled and swallowed him. I swore and went for the manual chain on the dock lock, pulled it hard enough to scald my palm, and the steel hook let go a 1/4 inch and clamped again with a little sound that almost matched the sound a person makes when they know you will keep trying until you snap something you cannot replace. The plate bounced under my foot, and the impact traveled through my bones like a chord played on a bad piano. At the far end of the dock, a roll-up door had been left half-raised over a concrete ramp that went down toward the yard. I thought if I could open that to bleed cold into the place, it might quiet whatever was waking. I walked to it with my flashlight swinging, stepped under the curtain of chains, and grabbed the strap. The moment my hand closed, the strap moved the other way with a tidy violence like someone stronger had already made a decision, and my part in it would ruin the rhythm. The door fell the last 6 inches and kissed the concrete with a neat rubber thud, and the chains curled around themselves like content snakes. Something clattered overhead in the roof trusses, a small rain of dry grit falling in a pattern that sounded too regular to be accident. I turned and faced the dock where my truck waited with its face pressed to the seal, and for a long second the building inhaled all the little noises we accept on a dock: the tiny hiss of hydraulics, the tire rubber creak, the hum of lights, stopped together, and the vacuum they left behind pressed on my ears hard enough to make the world dim. Then air rushed from behind the plate across my boots with a wet warmth, and the dock light flipped to green like an eye opening, and the hook let go a half-inch, and I moved, because I am a man who knows how to leave when a thing that holds you blinks. I climbed into the cab and turned the key, and the engine came up like it had been waiting at the window for me to run, and the ELD screen threw a warning about movement with door open, and I did not care because the door swung shut by itself and snagged the latch with a certainty that would make a locksmith suspicious. I dropped to low, eased against the lock, felt the hook hold me like a handshake I wanted to break, and then heard the intercom on the wall hiss through the pea-shooter hole and say, "Sorry." Then the lock let go like a parent who has decided to pretend you are old enough to cross the street. I rolled forward, and the rubber seal clung for a breath and then stripped free, and the whole building exhaled through the dockwell with a sound like the trip of a relief valve. I straightened, pulled out to the apron, stopped in the lane, and looked in my mirror. The dock light went dark, then red, then green, then dark again, and the plate lay flat, and a line of vapor ran out of the space under the door like breath on a cold morning. I stared at the office window and thought I saw someone in a vest lift a hand the way men lift hands when trucks pull away and they want to say drive safe without saying words, and nothing was there when I blinked. I parked at the edge of the yard to close my doors and counted my pallets because counting is a spell and spells need numbers. 20 staged, 20 on, I said to no one. And the count said I had left 20 and still had 20, and the math held like a bad friend holds your story. The load weight on my paperwork said I had delivered 8,000 pounds. The trailer felt lighter in the tug, enough to make the next hill less work. The BOL on my passenger seat had a fresh stamp that said, "Received by," and a signature I could not read and a time that matched the clock on the dash. The lumper fee showed as charged. The office phone number that had rung to nowhere now connected to a recording that thanked me for keeping the line clear and asked me to come again during normal business hours that the voice did not define. I put the truck in gear and left because I have learned the difference between finishing a job and staying to explain it. At the first truck stop with bright enough light to argue with the last hour, I pulled into a slot and cut the engine and waited for the cab to tell me if the building had climbed in with me. The smell of wet concrete had stayed behind, and all I had was my normal diesel and a jacket that carried an office's different air. On the CB, an old-timer talked about yard dogs run badly in the Carolinas, and a kid asked how to set tandems for a tight receiver and the world pretended to be exactly the world. My phone buzzed with a deposit notification from a carrier services app for a lumper fee credit I had not requested. A message from dispatch arrived that said, "Good turn, thanks for pushing through after hours." And the way they wrote thanks made me want to laugh and sleep at the same time. I stared out the windshield and took a breath, and the glass fogged in a crescent just above the tint band, two small ovals side by side as if someone had leaned in to read my hours. I wiped them away and told the cab that in the morning I would forget. I did not forget. 2 days later, my backhaul took me past the same exit in daylight when the wind had gone home and the sun had put a decent face on things. And I pulled off because curiosity is not a virtue, but it does cut through tired. The industrial park looked emptier under blue sky. The gate to the warehouse lot was chained, and the padlock ate its own rust. The dock lights were dead. The doors had been welded shut in a line by someone with a sense of symmetry. A for-lease banner snapped itself against the corrugated wall with a rhythm that might have been assistance or a warning. I parked at the curb and walked up to the office window and cupped my hands against the glare and saw a room stripped bare. No desk, no monitor, dust lines on the floor where furniture had once sat, a rectangle on the wall where a corkboard had hung, the outline of a cat calendar in sunburned paint. I turned to go, and a small ripple moved across the dust like a breath and settled, and I told myself a truck had gone by on the distant road and made the world thinner for a second. Back in the cab, the ELD pinged with an appointment reminder for tonight at a different address, and for a heartbeat emptied itself of text and displayed a single word that I will not claim a machine chose for me. Breathe. When drivers tell stories over coffee and pie, the buildings are always haunted in the old ways with men who died and want to keep working, and lights that turn on to remind you someone forgot the switch. This was not that. This felt like a place that had learned from the people who ran it and missed the shape of their days and decided to finish the night with me, because the last load it had handled did not get handled. And any machine with a purpose gets mean when you take the purpose away. If you ever pull down a narrow street into a yard that looks empty, and the dock lock grabs its own hook, and the dock plate lifts like a tongue, and the sign-in sheet already carries your name, remember that buildings that know how to breathe also know how to let go if you give them the dignity of finishing what they started. Stage your pallets where the floor says, and do not stack higher than shoulder, and keep your hands out of places your bones do not understand. And when the intercom calls you by a name nobody in that office should know, answer with the same voice you use on a radio late at night when you are trying to keep a stranger awake. If the lock will not release, ask. And if the place pauses long enough to inhale, leave. Because anything that needs to breathe can also starve, and you do not want to be the last bite a hungry building takes. I am a trucker, and my stories usually end with a scale ticket and a bed. But this one ends with a warehouse still humming in the corner of my head and a habit I cannot shake. When I back into a dock now, I set the brake and put a palm on the dash and listen for a heartbeat that does not belong to my engine. If I hear it, I stage the freight quickly and with respect, and I make sure the lock lets go the first time I ask. If I do not hear it, I move anyway, because there is enough breath in the rest of the world for both of us, and I have miles before morning.